Hey there. So last week, we had a lot of people asking us to do something special for Kafka's birthday. So this will probably be the last time we ever talk about him, and what better way to celebrate that than by completely butchering his name. Happy birthday, Joseph. And since he died 68 years ago today, we figured it would be fun to go over some of his most famous quotes, or at least the ones that fans of our channel think are cool. You guys know we love Kafka, so let's get started. We all have our own problems and struggles, but try to imagine how much worse things would be if you turned into a giant bug. That's exactly what happens in Kafka's Metamorphosis. Gregor Samsa wakes up from a strange dream and immediately notices he is unable to move or make any noise. He tries to call out for help, but instead only manages to produce a cough. When his family comes in, they're initially confused and concerned, but they quickly realize that Greg has turned into a giant insect. Now, it's never explained how or why Gregor Samsa becomes a giant bug. It's just something that happens. But even though the exact cause of his condition is never discovered, that doesn't mean Kafka didn't explore some pretty interesting themes with this story. One of these themes is employment. After all, Gregor loses his job as soon as he can no longer function as a worker. Kafka was well aware of how brutal capitalist exploitation could be and how heartless employers could be towards their workers. Even before the story starts, Gregor has been working diligently at his job and doing everything he can to pay off his father's debt. But as soon as he becomes an insect, he is immediately fired without a second thought. This shows just how little value his humanity actually has in this society. Which leads us to our first quote. Always have an emergency fund, because you might just turn into a bug and lose your job. But seriously, having an emergency fund is extremely important, especially considering how unstable the economy has become recently. If anything, just watch this video to see how ridiculous inflation has gotten. And then remember this quote whenever you hear some politicians saying that it's not a big deal. The next theme is compassion. Now, Greg's family isn't the best in the world. In fact, they only really care about themselves and the money Greg brings in. But after he turns into an insect, they begin to show a bit of true empathy. They start to feel bad for him and want to take care of him, but not for long. However, this moment of caring does tell us something about Greg's family, which brings us to our next quote. True empathy is revealed not when someone is perfect, but when they're a giant, helpless insect. At first, Greg's family is horrified by his appearance, but they eventually begin to feel bad for him. This shows that we should always treat others with kindness and understanding, especially when they're going through a tough time. Greg's transformation also brings us to another theme: identity. In modern society, it can feel like our jobs define us, and many of us struggle to figure out who we are outside of our careers. For Greg, his entire identity is wrapped up in his job. Before he becomes an insect, he thinks about work constantly and seems to take pride in his position at the company. He works hard so that his father would not have to worry about money and feels upset when he is unable to meet his expectations. However, as soon as he loses his job, his family begins to completely ignore him. This highlights how capitalism can reduce people to nothing more than their economic value. But we have to ask ourselves, what exactly is the point of this reduction? What does it mean to turn a person into an object? Or to put it another way, what does it mean to turn a person into a bug? Well, one possible interpretation is that turning a person into a bug represents a loss of humanity. Now, there's a lot of ways to interpret this quote, but here's one of them. Your identity is more than your job. Don't let capitalism turn you into a human-sized roach. Greg's job makes him feel important and useful, but as soon as he loses it, his family stops caring about him. This shows that we should undefine ourselves by our jobs, and that we need to find other sources of self. Now, we know finding other sources of self-worth isn't easy, which is why we have an entire course dedicated to helping you develop a positive self. But what we can say is that being a mindless worker drone is definitely not the answer. Speaking of which, while Greg's family is pretty terrible, they're not the worst characters in the story. That title definitely goes to the tenant. When Greg's father goes to complain about the smell coming from the apartment, the tenant doesn't even bother to listen to his side of the story and instead demands that they be evicted immediately. This shows that some people can be incredibly judgmental and quick to assume the worst about others. However, this also shows us that sometimes the biggest monster isn't the one with 6 legs, which brings us to our next quote. Sometimes the biggest monster isn't the one with 6 legs, but the one with a cold heart. The tenant is a prime example of this. He is willing to condemn an entire family without hearing their side of the story. This contrasts sharply with those who show compassion and understanding towards others. Of course, this is easier said than done, especially when you're dealing with such a traumatic situation. But perhaps the most important lesson we can learn from Kafka's Metamorphosis is to not take our loved ones for granted. Throughout the story, Greg's family barely acknowledges his presence. They only seem to care about him when he turns into an insect. This teaches us to appreciate the people in our lives while we still can. Unfortunately, life doesn't always give you the chance to do that. But if we can take anything away from this story, it's to be grateful for every moment we have with the ones we love. Which leads us to our next quote. Don't take your loved ones for granted. Tomorrow, they might be reviled and shoved under the furniture. Now, obviously this is a bit of an exaggeration, but as we've already established, Greg's family isn't the best. After he turns into an insect, they quickly begin to resent him. Instead of trying to help him, They focus on how much of a burden he has become and how much his presence is affecting their lives. In the end, they completely abandoned him and refused to take care of him. This is tragic, but it serves as a reminder to always show appreciation for our loved ones. Life has a funny way of reminding us who truly matters and who doesn't. And if you find yourself taking your loved ones for granted, just remember Greg's story. Another theme in Kafka's Metamorphosis is family. As we've already mentioned, Greg's family isn't very supportive. They're selfish and only care about themselves. However, despite their flaws, they're still family. Greg still loves them and wants them to be happy. This highlights the complexities of family relationships and the challenges of communicating effectively within a family. Greg's family does understand what he is going through, and they're unable to communicate their feelings in a healthy way. This leads to a lot of tension and conflict within the family and ultimately contributes to Greg's downfall. In the end, we have to ask ourselves, what does it mean for a family to fail? Well, here's one way to look at it. Life throws but how your family catches you says everything. Greg's family fails him in every way imaginable. They're supposed to be his support system, but they abandon him the moment he becomes a burden. This shows the importance of having a strong support system and the devastating consequences of not having one. Throughout the story, Greg feels like an outcast and no one understands what he's going through. This makes him feel isolated and hopeless, which ultimately leads to his death. In the end, Greg's family fails him, his society fails him, and even his own mind fails him. He's abandoned by everyone and left to die alone. This is a tragic ending, but it highlights the importance of seeking help when we're struggling and the need for greater understanding and compassion towards those who are different. If you're interested in reading more about these struggles, we highly recommend checking out the Metamorphosis and other works by Franz Kafka. Finally, the last theme we want to talk about is change. As we've already mentioned, Greg's transformation into an insect is sudden and unexplained. It just happens. This reflects the unpredictable nature of life and the challenges we face. When we have to adapt to new circumstances, Greg's family struggles to accept his new reality and refuses to help him adjust to his new life. This highlights the difficulties of embracing change and the importance of supporting those who are going through it. Ultimately, Greg is unable to adapt to his new reality and dies. This serves as a reminder to embrace change and to support those who are struggling to do the same. We hope you enjoyed these 7 powerful quotes by Joseph Kafka. Which one was your favorite? Let us know in the comments below. Before we wrap things up, we want to thank you for watching this video. We know there are literally hundreds of videos and articles about Kafka out there, but we really appreciate you choosing to spend some of your valuable time with us. As always, we're so grateful for your support. It means the world to us. Alright, now that all the crying is over, remember to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you won't miss our next upload. And don't forget to pick up your free guide, How to Build a Positive Self-Image, from our website. Just click the link in the description below. We hope it helps you on your journey towards self